Hello, my lovely sisters and brothers. How are you? Wasn't that beautiful? That song is called Nigun of the Birds by Rabbi Shlomo Katz. How are you doing? It's a wonderful Wednesday night. Let's light up the darkness. One of these days, it may run out of gas. I ought to have a spare one on hand. All right, who is going to be joining us as we embark on one of those special pages in the Talmud? It's got a whole bunch of wisdom teachings, including two, not one, but two very, very famous Talmudic sayings that are recognized far and wide beyond even the Talmud itself. Who's going to be with us this night? Good evening, says Melissa from Great Neck, New York, Stephen from New Hampshire, James from Indianapolis, Randy from Florida, Fitz from St. Louis, Paula from Chicago, Lucy from Minneapolis. If this is your first time joining us for the show, please let us know so we can welcome you. Nancy from North Carolina, Diane says it's gorgeous to vote in Plano, Texas. Joy from New Jersey, Rochelle just says God. Bill is with us from Arkansas. Ace Turkseven from California. Rochelle with us from Modesto. Juanita from Atlanta. Clyde from Greater DC in Maryland. Stephanie says Shalom Aleichem. Therese is with us from Texas. Pam is with us from Nashville. Hannah from Mississippi. Tamara from Wisconsin. And Rachel is with us from Brisbane in Australia. Welcome, welcome. It's so great that you're with us. Over there on the YouTube side, Lindsay is with us from Cincinnati. Welcome, my good friends. All right. It's almost like, an embarrassment of riches, right? When so often we get into long technical sections of the Talmud and we're just, aching for one of those beautiful little digressions that are more on kind of the wisdom and folktale sort of side of things, the Agadata of as it's known in the Talmud. And then finally we get to a section that has a bunch of that kind of wisdom, and it's like, the sages just pack so many of those teachings into one place that it's like it's almost too much. It's a little overwhelming. Any one of these teachings we could spend quite a while discussing, but we don't have that luxury, so we're gonna move through them at a good clip. It's almost like reading Proverbs, Solomon's book of Proverbs in the Bible. There's just so much wisdom packed into each chapter. Really what you want to do is dwell on each verse of a book like that. But it is what it is. So let's get into it. Where are we? We are holding in chapter 6, the first Mishna, our discussion of the first Mishna in chapter 6 of Tractate Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud. This is Daf Samech Hey, that's page 65. We are this first Mishnah that we're discussing, and we're in an extended discussion of that Mishnah, has to do with joining courtyards, and that the Jews who share a courtyard or who are joining courtyards that abut onto an alley, they have to join into an Eruv so that they can carry even in their own courtyard, because other houses have rights to walk through that courtyard as well. And then how do we handle the situation where somebody refuses to join in that Eruv so that the courtyards can be joined, or forgot to join in the Eruv, or is not qualified to join because it's either an apostate Jew who doesn't hold by the teachings of the rabbis and the principle of Eruv itself, or a non-Jew for whom these laws don't apply. Nevertheless, he lives in that courtyard, so some arrangement has to be made. And as we learn, what we do with the non-Jew who can't join in the Eruv, we still have to secure his participation. So we explain to him what's going on, and we say we need to rent your rights. He doesn't lose anything by renting his rights. He's sort of just renting out the right of a Jew to carry in that courtyard on Shabbos, but the arrangement has to be made so that it's official. And if he doesn't want to cooperate, well, then that's the kind of issues that we've been discussing. So yesterday, this digression began because we had a teaching that was shared by Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, that in that situation where the non-Jew who lives in a house in a courtyard that opens into an alleyway, and that alleyway has other courtyards opening into it where everyone else in those courtyards is Jewish, and all the Jews have joined in an Eruv, and then this guy didn't want to cooperate or wasn't available to cooperate. And they were figuring out what they could do. And then they had this teaching, this wonderful leniency, that if one of them could make an arrangement with the non-Jewish, property owner who shared that alleyway with them, that if he could just keep something in his yard, like a shovel or some small tool, just keep some small implement on the property of the non-Jew with his permission, then technically that Jew would acquire the status of a hired laborer of the non-Jew, and then he could join in the Eruv with everybody else, and then everybody would be permitted to carry objects on Shabbos, not only in their own courtyards, but in the alleyway as well. So that leniency, that teaching came from Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. Rav Nachman commented on that teaching. Oh, that's an excellent teaching. What a wonderful ruling. But he doesn't like all of the rulings of Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. Namely, there was another ruling by Shmuel, cited by Rav Yehuda, which said that a sage who has had more than a glass of wine should not sit in judgment, right? Just if he's drank a revi'is of wine, a quarter lug, which is about 3.8 fluid ounces, and we're assuming that this was not the very strong wine of that time, but it's for drinking, so it's already diluted. And there's a question whether one is competent to judge or not. If he had 4 glasses of wine, I think everybody would agree he's not. So then the question is, well, if he's had any wine, Shmuel says he shouldn't sit to judge. Rav Nachman said, until I've had a glass of wine, I feel like my mind is not clear, so I don't like that ruling. And then Rava, the sage Rava, said to Rav Nachman, it is inappropriate for you to say that some rulings are pleasant and some rulings are not. Some rulings are excellent and some rulings are not. You can say, on the question of law, I hold like this or I hold like that. You can give your legal opinion, but we're not asking you to sort of put yourself forward as a critic of other opinions of the sages, whether to praise or criticize them. It is inappropriate for you to make comments like that. And Rav Nachman took the criticism from Rava and said, you're correct. I retract these statements that I made about some teachings are nice and some teachings not so nice. But having gotten into the subject of wine and a sage issuing judgments on legal rulings, then we got into related questions like, can one who has had a drink pray? Meaning specifically say the Shemona Esrei, the 3 times a day standing prayer. And the answer was, if he's had a drink, he shouldn't pray. But if he does pray, his prayer is valid and he has fulfilled his obligation. However, if he's intoxicated, he has not fulfilled his obligation. And in fact, his prayer is an abomination. So then the question was, well, how do we define intoxicated? And intoxicated, kind of a sensible definition in this context. Intoxicated is like if you wouldn't step before a king of flesh and blood in that state of inebriation because you'd be embarrassed because you would slur your speech and you would say silly things. You'd be awed by the presence of a flesh and blood king, so you wouldn't get drunk. You wouldn't have more than one drink in such a king, such a monarch's presence. Well, then you shouldn't stand in the presence of God, the King of Kings, to pray or to sort of channel God's will if you're going to be sitting as a judge, right? So if you wouldn't do it to a flesh and blood king, you shouldn't do it before the King of Kings. And that's how we define intoxication for these purposes. That's where we were yesterday. And now, let me see, where am I going to be starting today? This is all the stuff that we caught up yesterday. Very good. Okay, and so now we start with a new teaching. So Rav Sheshes said, in the name of the great sage Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who's a great sage. We learned, I don't know how many pages ago, the story that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was promoted at a very young age to become the Nasi when there was sort of some political problems with his superiors. He ended up getting displaced, but not entirely displaced, even though he assumed that leadership when he was only 18 years old. Then it was inappropriate for him to have that leadership at such a young age. But nevertheless, he maintained some of the leadership and then eventually became the Nasi and held that position for a long time. Okay. Yeah, that's not exactly right. He shared the position, but Rabbi Gamliel was succeeded by his son. So I'm not sure how long Elazar ben Azariah held the position of Nasi by himself. I shouldn't speak on that. At any rate, Elazar ben Azariah once said, I can argue that since the temple was destroyed, all of the Jews are exempt from liability for their sins, just like one who is intoxicated. He just said, are exempt from liability, just like one who is intoxicated. And his proof text for that is a line from Isaiah, which says, therefore, hear now this, you afflicted and drunken, but not from wine. All right, what are we talking about? That once the second temple was destroyed, and it was destroyed for good, right? We're still living in the exile that resulted from the destruction of the second temple and awaiting the coming of the Messiah, when the third temple will go up in a day. It will go up instantly, right? It won't be a long period of construction. It'll be assembled in heaven and transported to earth onto the Temple Mount by God, at the Messiah's, asking, I suppose. At any rate, once we went into that period, though, of the post-Second Temple period, after the destruction of the temple, it's like the Jewish people was so stunned by that event, right? The temple was so very much the center of Jewish practice and focus and prayer, and it's like everything of the Jewish people was directed toward the temple in Jerusalem, toward the tabernacle when we were in the wilderness, and then even in the first 400 years that the children of Israel were living in the Holy Land before the first temple was built by King Solomon. That was 400-year period, but there was the tabernacle. And so we had the altar, we had the sanctuary, and then it was replaced by the temple. Lasted about another 400 years. There was a 70-year exile to Babylonia. Then finally the second temple was rebuilt, and it stood for another 400 years, more or less. So for about 1,200 years, Judaism was based. There were many things that you did in your home and in your community. It's not like there were no local practices. But the kind of overarching organization of the people and the religion was making the 3 pilgrimage festivals to Jerusalem every year, bringing offerings of all different kinds, and the massive celebrations that sort of reverberated out from the temple throughout the Jewish world. Once the temple was destroyed, it's like we were reeling. We were stunned. We didn't know which way to turn. And it wasn't like we only felt that way for a day or a week or a month or a year. That's a feeling, says Elazar ben Azariah, that just went on and on and on. It's like the Jews are still stunned, and we should feel that way. So then, of course, the Gemara immediately objects. Well, okay, the Jews may feel stunned that the temple was taken from us, but that doesn't exempt us from liability. As we know, a person who is actually intoxicated on alcohol, if he makes a contract to buy something, he must buy it. If he makes a contract to sell something, he must sell it. If he commits a crime with a capital penalty, he receives that penalty, whether it's execution or lashes. In other words, he's liable for all his actions, even if he did them while he was intoxicated. So what are you talking about, Elazar ben Azariah, that we're exempt? Well, there is one thing that we're exempt from when we're intoxicated, and that is prayer, the obligation to pray. Since it's an abomination to stand before the Holy One and praise and petition and be with and speak to in our time of prayer, it's an abomination to do that while intoxicated. It's okay. So if a person's intoxicated, they're exempt from prayer. So is Elazar ben Azariah saying that you could argue, and he's not saying he holds this way. He's really just setting up another point. He says, I could argue. I don't. I could argue that since the temple fell, we're so stunned and reeling that we've lost that nexus between heaven and earth that the temple was, that it's like we're in an intoxicated daze and we should be exempt from prayer. We should be exempt from prayer. Okay, so maybe that's what Elazar ben Azariah meant, but obviously he didn't hold that way. No Jews are exempt from prayer. And in fact, the halacha is we're liable for all these activities that we do when we're intoxicated. We are not liable to pray when we're intoxicated. We should not. We are exempt from prayer while intoxicated. But when the booze wears off, we have to make up the prayer that we missed. Now, it is actually true, however, that if a person is so intoxicated that he is compared to Lot, right? Abraham's nephew Lot, who became so intoxicated, and what a terrible memory in the Bible that the Bible records after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. They thought the whole world was destroyed, and he and his daughters were hiding in a cave, thinking that maybe they're the last people on earth. So they got him drunk on consecutive nights, and his own daughters slept with him. And children were born of that union of incest. Terrible. Wouldn't have happened if he hadn't been intoxicated. So if a person is intoxicated to the degree that Lot was intoxicated, meaning just a stumbling, incompetent drunk, okay, so that person is considered an imbecile. And his actions are not taken seriously, right? So if you see that somebody's that drunk and you try to get him, to sign a bill of sale, like you're going to make a deal with this drunk and take advantage of him when he's so blind drunk that he's like an imbecile, that contract is not going to hold up. All right. Rabbi Hanina comments in the course of this discussion of being intoxicated and praying that one who is intoxicated is similar to somebody who is asleep and calls this the time of one's arrogance, right? In other words, if you were part of an army unit and you were in enemy territory, right, sooner or later you guys need to sleep. But you wouldn't go to sleep without setting a guard, right? Somebody would have a watch during the night, and after a few hours, he would wake up at one of the other soldiers, and that guy would watch so that everybody else could sleep safely. But you would set a guard, you would set a watch to make sure that you're safe. One who goes to sleep and just doesn't care what's going on, whether it's because he doesn't lock his doors, doesn't have a burglar alarm, this is considered a time of arrogance. And likewise, one who gets intoxicated has rendered himself, less capable of protecting himself or herself. Now, that's not only that you can't protect yourself from external forces that may endanger you, it means that you also can't protect yourself from yourself, right? That you might behave in an entirely inappropriate way when you're intoxicated, and that's something that you really need to guard against. And if you don't guard against it, it's considered arrogance, according to Rabbi Hanina. Now, then he says, so if one shields himself, okay, in other words, he turns away from the Yetzer Hara, one turns away from his evil inclination during his time of arrogance, well, he will close the door on troubles. Right? He will protect himself from troubles. So it's a little unclear what Rabbi Hanina is saying. Is he saying that one who marshals the strength to sort of push away and put down and overcome his evil inclination while he's intoxicated, he's going to be rewarded for that even when he's not intoxicated, and troubles will stay away from him? Maybe. Or maybe he's just making the simple and logical point that sort of flows as a natural consequence that if you find yourself intoxicated, maybe a little more intoxicated than you planned on becoming, it happens to people, happens all the time. So if you find that you're in that condition, you need to be extra humble and say to yourself, whoa, I didn't mean to do this, I need to guard against my evil inclination, because if I let it in, if I let it take over, if I let it dictate my actions, for sure I'm going to get in trouble. So to avoid trouble, when you find yourself intoxicated, be very humble and take defense, right? Take defensive measures against your own evil inclination. Like give your car keys to a friend. Like close the computer, right, before you send that email. Like turn off the phone before you make that call you shouldn't make. Like shut your mouth before you tell, your dear friend or spouse your opinion that you knew better than to share in other times, right? You have to be so on your guard when you've lowered your guard by becoming intoxicated. And we learned that from Rabbi Hanina. And Rabbi Yochanan adds to that the way that Rav Steinsaltz interprets his saying here on our page, is that when you're intoxicated and you're concerned that the Yetzer Hara could overcome you, it's like you got to pick up weapons and a shield, right? Same idea. You got to pick up your weapons, whatever your weapons are, to keep your own evil inclination at bay. Use them, because you have to understand that as soon as alcohol enters your body, the strength of your evil inclination is vastly magnified, and the strength of your good inclination is diminished. So you need to arm yourself, as it were, against the influence of the evil inclination. The Gemara now raises a different question. Since we're comparing being intoxicated to being asleep or to being very weary, so the question then is, should a person pray when he's exhausted, right? You realize that you're exhausted. A Jew has an obligation to pray 3 times a day. Okay, you didn't do your evening prayer yet. You forgot, you were busy, you were at a concert, or whatever, and now you're exhausted, right? So you're exhausted. So then the question is, should you pray while you're exhausted? So there's going to be a variety of opinions on this subject. Rav Sheshes is of the opinion that no, not a good idea. If you're gonna speak to God and tell him what's going on with you and ask for his mercy and his blessings and thank him for everything and praise him, etc. So you need to be, alert when you do that. So better you should take a nap, get some rest, and then stand before your maker and speak your prayer. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. He says, well, the time to pray is now. Rally. Understand that it's important what you need to do, and just shake yourself awake and do what you need to do so that you can speak your prayer at the right time. Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Chiya Bar Ashi, in the name of Rav, would actually agree with Rav Sheshes. They think, when you're distressed, when you're unsettled, right? Not necessarily exhausted, but similar in that you can't marshal all of your mental faculties. If you don't have all your mental faculties available to you because you're distressed or unsettled, totally freaked out, stressed out, whatever is distracting you, so don't pray at that time. And likewise, don't issue decisions, right? So now they're speaking to people like themselves, sages who are judges and who hear cases and issue rulings of Torah law. If they're distressed or unsettled, no, they should wait until they've got some clarity and peace of mind before they sit and judge, before they issue rulings, and before they pray. So again, we're seeing that connection between prayer and issuing rulings, a judge issuing, when we pray, we need to have a similar mental condition to a judge who's issuing rulings. Why? Because we're standing before the King of Kings, right? Just as a judge is trying to channel God's will accurately and appropriately for the litigants who are before him, or the person who's bringing the question, they need a very clear mind. Likewise, when you're standing before God and telling him what's going on in your life and what you need, not only for yourself, but on behalf of your people, right? Because when we pray the 3 times a day, most of what we're praying is actually on behalf of the whole people, right? We say we and us. And so you need to channel those prayers appropriately through a clear and settled mind. Rav Yehuda says, with regard to Torah study, so a different question, should we engage in Torah study? Similar question, but not the same question. Rav Yehuda says, with regard to Torah study, the night was made for sleep, right? So Rav Yehuda was not a big fan of studying Torah late at night because he would get very tired, and then his thoughts were muddled. He thought it was better to get a good night's sleep, get up early, and then start your Torah study in the morning. Resh Lakish said, no, the moon was created only so that we could study by its light at night, right? So he's a big fan of the nighttime Torah study. Rabbi Zera said, the reason that my teachings of Torah are clear and sharp is because they were all developed during the daytime under the clear and sharp light of the sun. Right? So he's a fan of daytime study. He'd rather use the night for sleeping. So it seems to me, just to Sal, that the question we should really be asking is not, is the nighttime the right time for Torah study, but rather, are you a person who learns well at night? Right? So if you learn well at night, okay, then the night is the right time for you. But if you're a person who at night your thoughts are hopelessly muddled and you just don't pick things up because you're so tired at the end of a tough day, so then you want to carve out time in your day because that Torah study at night is not going to be effective. And maybe the question could also be, are you a person who appreciates and responds well to a mix? Sometimes you study during the day, sometimes you study during the night. You mix it up because if you have too many nighttime sessions, you won't retain anything. But if you don't have any, you might not have enough learning in your life. And Rav Acha Bar Yaakov felt that way, and he would say that he liked to borrow and repay. And what he meant by that was he's a guy who liked to study during the day because he's sharper during the day. But sometimes stuff comes up. He was a businessman, the students came and asked many questions. There was some kind of distraction. He didn't get through the studies that he wanted to do during that day. Okay, so on those days, he would study at night to make up for the hours that were missed during the day. And so for him, what worked is a mix of daytime study and nighttime study. Rabbi Elazar said that when he would return from a journey, remember, a journey for them is different than a journey for us, right? So if they just, if they went 200 miles, something that for us would be like a 5-6 hour drive, for them, that's like a week-long trip, walking or riding on a donkey. So it's a much bigger trip. And then when he would get back, presumably there was no trip that was any kind of a real trip that was less than 3 weeks. And sometimes trips were, months long, many times. So when he would return from such a trip, for 3 days, he would not pray because he felt like his mind was still too unsettled from the journey, so exhausted from the journey, kind of easing his way back into his regular life at home. And he just felt like, there's too much to catch up on and things to do and people to see and just too much going on to pray properly until 3 days had passed after his return from the trip. Shmuel's father held the same way. Shmuel himself would not pray in a house that had any alcohol in it, not even because of his attitude toward drinking alcohol, but rather because the smell of alcohol was very distracting to him. I don't know if he had a particular sensitivity to the smell of alcohol or why he was so sensitive to it, but he didn't want there even to be alcohol in a house because he could smell it and it would distract him. And Rav Papa felt the same way about fried fish. For him, the smell of fried fish was too distracting. If there was fried fish in a house, he would pray somewhere else. So the halacha, the law is one should not pray where he's distracted, tired to the point of exhaustion, or angry, feeling other kinds of strong and distracting emotions. That is the law. But, says the Shulchan Aruch, the codification of law that we follow now that sort of takes all these teachings, compiled over the centuries and just lays them out in a simple and organized way that we can follow in modern life, as that was sort of set down around the 1500s. So says the Shulchan Aruch, you're not supposed to pray if you're, distracted, exhausted, emotional, etc. But nowadays, we disregard that halakha. And we do pray when we're supposed to pray. Not if we're intoxicated, but if it's just a matter of being tired or distracted or emotional and the time comes to pray, you pray. Even though you're going to be distracted. Why? Check this out. Because we never reach the level of concentration and clarity and absorption that the sages had when they prayed. We never reach that stage. Even when we think we're fully focused, clear, and praying and reading every word carefully, we're nowhere near the level of intentionality and mindfulness that the sages had when they prayed. And since we're not even gonna get there anyway, we might as well pray on time, because the difference between our concentrated prayers and distracted prayers is small compared to the difference between our focused prayers and the sages' focused prayers. How do we know that? We don't have it on this page, but elsewhere we read, I don't remember where the page is, but we read that the sages, when they would pray, and this tradition lasted for a long time, and the Kabbalists also had this tradition. I mean, they would prepare for an hour, right? They would meditate for an hour to prepare to pray. Then they would pray for an hour, and then they would sort of return for an hour. It took them 3 hours to pray, right? And they're talking about the prayer. In other words, that the prayer of the 18 blessings, which we usually, sometimes we do it as little as 5 minutes. Usually it's like 10 minutes. Some people, really mindful, they spend 15 minutes. I like to even sometimes spend 20 minutes on it sometimes. But they would spend an hour just on the prayer, and 1 hour to prepare for it, and 1 hour to sort of return from those higher realms where their prayer took them. So, there's a lot of room for improvement in our prayer practice. And, maybe we'll never get to the level that they were at. But it's kind of nice to know that people, in our tradition prayed that way at one time, and being aware of that, maybe we set aside at least sometimes extra time for prayer. And all those preparation prayers, which are really a script for that kind of preparation that I'm describing, like that's the idea, Maybe once in a blue moon, see if you could take an hour to prepare to pray, and an hour to pray, and an hour to stay in that space and gently return to earth. What would that be like? And how would that affect our lives if at least once in a while we would pray that way? Rabbi Hanina comments that one who is appeased by wine is like the Creator. And what he's describing is that our Creator would sometimes get angry with us because of our sins and all the multitudinous ways that we let our Creator down because of the way we treat each other so badly and we're so disrespectful to our Creator. But when we would bring an offering, right, that offering would have a pleasing aroma. The Torah tells us that the offerings had a pleasing aroma, and Rashi teaches that why was it pleasing? Because the Lord commanded us to bring offerings, and we did. When we do what God asks us to do, it pleases God. He's told us that. We know it's pleasing to God because he told us that it's pleasing to him. And in the same way that when you tell your kids what to do, they don't want to do it. You know it's good for them. That's why you're telling them to do it. And they do it just because you told them to, because they trust you, because they understand you're their parent, you love them. It pleases us that they do our will. So likewise, we please God when we do what he asks. And if we bring an offering and then it's burned on the altar, so then it creates a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And if when we drink wine, and like, let's say we were angry at somebody and then we have a drink to just kind of calm down a little bit, and we allow ourselves to be appeased and not hold on to that grudge or that anger, well, then we're emulating God. That's a good thing to do. And Rav Steinsaltz says, and this is true irrespective of whether wine is involved or not. Anyone who allows him or herself to be appeased when they are angry at someone and they just let it go, particularly when the person we're angry at makes some kind of an effort to reconcile with us, apologize or approach and restore intimacy. Whenever we allow ourselves to be appeased, we're acting in a godly manner. And now we come to the first of these two very famous sayings in the Talmud. Rabbi Chia says that wine in Hebrew is yayin, so that has a numerical value. All of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet are also used as numbers, right? That's why today's page 65, is Samech Hey. Samech is 60, Hey is 5. Those are also letters in the alphabet. Yayin is spelled Yud, Yud, Nun. Yud is 10, so 10, and Nun is 50, is 70. The numerical value of the Hebrew word for wine is 70. So Rabbi Chia says two things. He says, one who drinks wine and his mind remains settled, right? He doesn't drink wine in order to become drunk and boisterous, but rather just to calm down and get clear, maybe let the day fall away so that he can focus on more important things. A person like that is acting like the 70. So what does he mean? The 70 elders, right? So when Moses, it was too much for Moses to judge the people by himself. There were millions of people and only one judge. So he took advice from his father-in-law, Yisro, and he checked with God, and God said, yeah, it's a good idea. You should have help. And so he appointed 70 elders, right? So the 70 elders were the kind of, most respectable and wisest people in the nation. And so one who uses wine appropriately has a bit of the attribute of the 70 elders. And Rabbi Chia continues, but also when wine enters, when yayin enters, which has a numerical value of 70, sod emerges. Sod, which is samech vav daled, also has a numerical value of 70, and it means secret. So the famous saying in the Talmud is, when wine enters, secrets emerge. Or when wine enters, secrets come out. Now, this is going to have a double meaning. You can look at it two ways. On the one hand, because in Torah study, we're sort of always pursuing deeper and deeper levels of understanding in the verses of the Torah, and Sod are understood to be the deepest levels, the deepest secrets that are in the Torah that we can only get after great, 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 great study. So this is the kind of idea that, if you've been turning it over and over and over in your mind, like I know as a screenwriter, sometimes you have a problem. You got to get a character from here to there, and there's no reason for them to be there, and it just feels so artificial and false. And how are we going to get the character? Then I can't figure it out. And you work on the problem for many days. You can't figure it out. It's exhausting. You finally just let it go, And then you just stop thinking about it. And later, maybe you're at dinner with some friends. You have a glass of wine, and suddenly the solution comes as if out of nowhere. So that's when wine enters, secrets come out, that kind of insight and realization. However, it also has the other side of the coin. If you drink too much wine, your secrets may emerge. Loose lips sink ships. So don't be so arrogant to think that you're an expert in using wine to modify your consciousness exactly how you want, and you're like such an expert in how you modify your own consciousness that you're always in control, because sooner or later you may be a little out of control and you may say things that you shouldn't have said. So beware, right? Beware. When wine enters, secrets come out, and that's on this page. The very next teaching is that Rabbi Hanin says wine was created only to comfort mourners and to reward the wicked in this world, right? So Rabbi Hanin is saying to Rabbi Chia, what I just said, right? Don't be so full of yourself that you think you know how to use wine, and that judicious and appropriate use of wine is always going to result in you perceiving secrets in the Torah, because maybe it won't. And maybe you won't find any secret and you'll think you need a little more wine, and then next thing you know, you're in big trouble. Because according to Rabbi Hanin, now wine is entirely problematic, and its only appropriate use is that when people are really distressed, because like they're in mourning, they've lost a loved one, okay, so they should get some comfort from some wine. Otherwise, what it really is for is to give the wicked their reward in this world. In other words, there are people who are, on balance. All of us, have a lot of good deeds, a lot of bad deeds. Hopefully our good deeds outweigh our bad deeds. A wicked person is somebody whose bad deeds outweigh their good deeds. And what he's saying is, such a person, they may get some reward in this world. Like they get to have fun, and because they have good deeds. So, okay, their good deeds get rewarded in this world with all the fun that they have with their wine. But then it's like the good deeds have already been rewarded. And when they get to the next world, all they're schlepping along with them is their sins, which they then have to account for. So not such a great reward to be rewarded in this world. You prefer to be rewarded in the next world, since this world is transitory and that world is eternal. And then we get to the second of these famous teachings. Rabbi Eli says that 3 matters reveal a person's true character: his cup, his pocket, and his anger. Very famous saying in the Talmud. What does Rabbi Eli mean? His cup means when he's intoxicated, right? It's not that this is some other person that you've never met before. Somehow there's an aspect of the person's true nature which is coming out when they're intoxicated. A person's pocket, meaning when money is on the line, people will show their true colors, right? People could be very nice, very polite, very nice. And then when it comes time to put up or shut up, then their true colors come out. And their anger, right? Some people, they're just very stiff. They don't really let you know who they are, what they're thinking. But when they finally get angry enough about something, then you know what they're really thinking. So 3 matters reveal a person's true character: his cup, his pocket, and his anger. And with that, we complete this digression with a series of wisdom teaching, kind of hinging on the idea of how does intoxication intersect with prayer, with judgment, with Torah study, etc. And now we actually return to the discussion of our Mishnah. I'm going to just do this quite briefly, so if you have questions or comments, very good time to type them in now. I'm going to be getting to them momentarily. Okay, so we're going back to the Mishnah and this idea that Jews, that there are multiple houses in a courtyard. They all have to participate in an Eruv so that all of them can carry in that courtyard and joining with courtyards. And what happens if there's a resident among them who can't or will not participate in the Eruv? So we have a situation. I made just a simple little sketch here where what we have is is 2 courtyards, right? So this is the alleyway down here. And in order for this Jew to go to his house, well, he just enters his courtyard and goes to his house. But there's an inner courtyard where a Jew lives and a Gentile, right? So there's a Jew and a Gentile. They both have houses and they share this inner courtyard. And so for them to go to their house from the alley or to leave their house and go back to the alley and return to the rest of the city, they have to pass through the outer courtyard. They don't have their own entrance to their courtyard. They can only get out to the rest of the city by passing through this outer courtyard. So the question is, on Shabbos, can the Jews carry objects as if they're in their own private domain? So there's a somewhat lengthy discussion about that. I'm just going to cut to the chase and tell you how this discussion comes out. So first of all, this Jew, he can go out to the city through his own courtyard. He's the only one in this courtyard. Normally, when you have a single family residence, right, in a single courtyard, there's no need for an Eruv. And of course, you can carry not only in your house, but in your courtyard. And you can carry objects on Shabbos in and out of your house and into your courtyard. But because other people have the legal right to pass through his courtyard, including this Jew right here, who walks through his courtyard, That's why his courtyard takes on the character of a public domain. It's a little bit of a public domain for the purposes of Eruv. So this Jew and that Jew have to join in an Eruv so that he can carry in his own courtyard, because this fellow can walk through it. So these two need to join in an Eruv. They would deposit a little bit of food in a basket, and they would probably store it in this guy's house. I don't even think that's necessary. It could be stored in his house as well, but it's joining these two courtyards. Now he can carry in his own courtyard, and he can carry objects into this courtyard. Likewise, this guy can carry objects out of his house into his courtyard and into this courtyard as well. For them to carry objects into the alley, if this is an alley, they'd have to join courtyards with other courtyards that open into this alley. The complication here is that there's a Gentile sharing this courtyard with a Jew. Now, if this Jew wasn't here, if there was only the situation of the one courtyard where a Jew and a Gentile live, then we learned in our Mishna that we're discussing that the Jew would not have to get into any kind of arrangement with the Gentile. The Gentile is not subject to the laws of Eruv, so he wouldn't have to do anything. He could carry objects in and out of his house, even though the Gentile also has a right to pass through that courtyard. He'd be fine in his own courtyard. He wouldn't need to make an arrangement with the Gentile. But now that these two guys have an arrangement with each other, now it's as if two Jews are sharing a courtyard with the Gentile, so they do need to make an arrangement with him. They need to rent his right of a Jew to carry on Shabbos. They have to make a formal arrangement. They can pay him a penny. It's just that they explain to him the situation. He agrees. And then these two guys can continue to carry objects in and out of their houses and between the two courtyards. And it would be the same answer, by the way, if the Gentile lived in the outer courtyard. It would be the same thing. They would need to make an Eruv with each other, and they'd have to rent the right of the Gentile if he lived over here in the outer courtyard. And the idea that this Jew cannot carry in his own courtyard because there's another Jew who walks through it, even though he lives alone in that courtyard, that's a ruling of Rabbi Akiva. And the idea that if there was only one courtyard, no outer courtyard, that a Jew who lives alone with a Gentile would not have to make an arrangement with him is per the leniency in our Mishnah of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, which we follow. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let's check comments and questions. Jessica English Titleman says, hello, my first time. I'm in northern Minnesota. Welcome, Jessica. I'm so glad you could stop by. This was a good day. Some days are really tough for a first timer, but this is a good day. A lot of these teachings certainly stand alone, and we can recognize the wisdom when we hear it. We don't need so much background, so welcome to you. Judy Lynn Hellman says, I love your blue wall. What color blue is that? I keep a... I keep this jar of paint in case I have holes in the wall when we put something up or something. So here you go. It's Modern Masters Shimmer Metallic Blue Metallic Paint Collection. I don't know if it's still available, but there it is. And thank you. I appreciate that. I think it's fun to have a blue wall. John Shore. It strikes me that one of the teachings of the Rabbi was that we should bring Yiddishkeit to all places on earth. You and Nina are clearly doing just that. May we all complete the entire Daf Yomi, the entire program of studying for 7.5 years that will take us through the entire Talmud. Thank you so much, John. It really means a lot to us when we get acknowledged that way. Thank you, dear brother. And may you begin and complete many tractates of the Talmud and finish Daf Yomi as well. I know you. You're an amazing doctor and a major blessing to your family and your community. Yosef Shum. I'm curious if the sages ever discussed if we should pray when we are distressed spiritually. If we are in a complaining type of attitude, should we bring it during davening or not? I would say absolutely. if the distress that we're feeling is, who am I? What is my purpose? What's going on in my life? God, I feel so distant from you. I want to be closer. I want to feel you. I want to be near you. That kind of a relationship with God is not only permissible, it's desirable. Certainly Rav Nachman of Breslov, taught constantly that you should open up yourself to God as you would to your best friend. And nobody's more on your side than God. So to tell God that you're distressed and how distressed you are absolutely is appropriate. I guess you could ask, do you want to bring that out during the prayer itself, during the Shemona Esrei? But we learned, it was in Tractate Shabbos, right? We learned that a prayer that doesn't include, it was in Brachos, it was in the first tractate of the Talmud, a prayer that doesn't include personal supplication, real words, unscripted words, but really telling God what we're about and what we need and what we'd like and what's on our mind is not a satisfactory prayer. It's not a real prayer. It's not a legitimate prayer. Every prayer has to include something that's really from the heart. So I would say the answer is yes, you should, Yosef. Robert Ichikawa. Mazel tov, my DNA is indicating we are part Ashkenazi Jewish from the South, so shalom y'all. Shalom y'all, it's great to see you. And I love, I didn't grow up in the South. I certainly had great friends over the years from the South. And I remember a friend was once asking another friend from the South, well, if you say y'all, to one person, then what do you say when you're talking to a group of people? And you say, well, obviously you say all y'all. So all y'all in the South, you're wonderful people, and I look forward to being among you soon when we can all travel again. Christine says, so if the Gentile were in the outer courtyard, the Jews would also need to make an arrangement with him? What a good question. So that's a different arrangement. So you're asking if there were two Jews here. All right, so for sure they need to make an Eruv with each other. Then they need to pass through the Gentiles' courtyard to get out there. I'm not sure about that case. Excellent question, right? I'm not sure. Carolyn Dobson Chavez. Is character inherent or malleable? Oh, well, that's an easy question. Look, I would say that it's both. It has to be both. Anybody who's raised children or been around children as they're growing up, you recognize some personality traits like so early. People have a character that, just becomes apparent from such a young age and remains their character. But think how much you've changed. Think how much people have changed, especially when they get involved in an organized effort to change. When you look, over the years, I've known people who really got into substance abuse and who then got themselves into the program, Alcoholics Anonymous, or is it called Narcotics Anonymous, or the different 12-step programs. And, some of those people, like the way that they have faced themselves and their own true nature and the honesty with which they do that, they emerge from that kind of bottoming out like new people, like amazingly new people, wonderful in many respects. So much of a life of faith is about, asking God to help us become that man or woman we aspire to be. Or as Bruce Springsteen says, a time comes in life when you got to start being that man or woman that you've been planning to be for a long time, right? So, of course it's malleable. It's not easy. It's the hardest thing in the world to create a character change in ourselves. And that's why, if you've been with me for a while, you've heard me teach so many times that, a New Year's resolution, the way that they're ordinarily practiced in this society, December 31st, have 10 drinks, Say to your buddy, oh, yeah, what? Tomorrow, I'm going to quit smoking for good. Tomorrow's the day, January 1st. And they skip the first cigarette of the morning, and by noon, it's like, forget it, man. I'm so hungover, I'll start tomorrow. And it never happens. So that kind of New Year's resolution is nonsense. But to recognize over time a pattern of behavior that is harmful to yourself and others, and a building resignation in yourself that you must change. That's the first step. That once you recognize it, and then you decide you're going to do something about it. And then you're going to get organized about what it's going to take to make that change. And then you're going to pray for help on a daily basis. And you're going to enroll others in the change that you're trying to make by telling people that you're trying to make this change so they can support you in that change. And understanding that you're going to slip back sometimes, but you're going to try to move forward. And over time, in a very organized way. And we really have 2 major 7-week periods where we do that. From the beginning of Elul, the last month of the year, through the holidays that we just went through. And that's why we ended up building a sukkah to represent that fragile new you. That's like a 7-week extended process of self-reflection and organizing oneself to make a change and praying for help to do it, recognizing that it's fragile just to get that change started. We really acknowledge how difficult it is. And likewise, after Passover, we have the counting of the Omer, which also is a spiritual practice very much designed to help us change character traits. It's that difficult. Our next opportunity on the calendar is Hanukkah. That's going to come up in not that long. Hanukkah is an 8-day holiday that celebrates miracles, where you can kind of compress those kinds of changes that could take weeks or months. Sometimes in that 8-day period, you can really pray for help and create a miracle in yourself. But it takes really praying for it, really committing to it, and tremendous strength to make it happen. So character is malleable, but not easily. That's what I've got for us today. It's been wonderful learning with you all. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Pacific, and we'll continue our learning here in chapter 6 on page 66 of Tractate Eruvin. All the best.